If someone had told me that a positive pregnancy test would eventually destroy my marriage, spark a criminal investigation, and tear an entire family apart, I would have laughed in their face. No joke. Back then, my life was pretty normal. I was 33, working as a labor and delivery nurse outside Chicago, pulling long shifts and surviving on coffee and stubbornness. Then I met Ethan Langley. He was funny, charming, and somehow remembered every random thing I ever told him. 3 years later, we were married. And honestly, life felt good. I had my own house, a career I loved. And for the first time in my life, I was about to become a mom. The morning I saw those 2 pink lines on the test, I just stared at them. Then I checked again. And again. Because there was no way. But it was real. When I showed Ethan, the guy literally started crying. Happy tears. The ugly kind. For the next few weeks, we lived in our own little bubble. Just us. And our secret. But there was one problem. His family. See, Ethan came from serious money. Not flashy influencer money. Old money. The kind that owns buildings and trusts and acts like they're doing you a favor by letting you sit at the dinner table. At the center of it all was his mother, Victoria Langley. Victoria ran everything. The family business. The trust. The family decisions. And if we're being honest, most of the family members too. She had always been polite to me, but it felt fake. Like she was waiting for me to slip up. Waiting for proof that I wasn't good enough for her son. I ignored it for years. Then came the pregnancy. A week before Victoria's birthday party, I went for my first ultrasound. The technician smiled. Then I heard it. A tiny heartbeat. Fast. Strong. Perfect. I cried so hard the poor technician handed me extra tissues. That's when Ethan and I made a decision. We'd announced the pregnancy at Victoria's birthday party. One big family surprise. Simple. Happy. Memorable. Yeah, about that. Because while Ethan and I were planning the happiest announcement of our lives, someone else was planning something too. And trust me, their plan was a whole different vibe. 3 days before the party, I overheard Victoria talking to her daughter. At the time, it sounded weird. Later, it sounded like a warning. Because the last thing I heard before they noticed me standing there was, if she's telling the truth, she'll prove it. And I had absolutely no idea what that meant. Yet. The night of Victoria's birthday party looked perfect. That's what made everything that happened next so insane. The event was held on the rooftop of one of the nicest hotels in downtown Chicago. String lights hung overhead. Music drifted through the air. Champagne flowed like water. The whole place looked straight out of a Netflix drama. Ethan squeezed my hand as we stepped off the elevator. "You ready?" he asked. I smiled. Ready as I'll ever be. At least I thought I was. The moment we walked onto the rooftop, Victoria spotted us. She was standing near the center of the crowd, dressed in an expensive cream-colored outfit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Classic Victoria. Everything about her screamed money. She hugged Ethan first. Then she turned to me, and for half a second, something flashed across her face. Not happiness, not excitement. Something else. Something cold. Then it disappeared. "Claire," she said with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Victoria. The fake politeness was exhausting. But I played along. I always did. For the first hour, everything felt normal. People mingled. Waiters passed appetizers. Guests laughed over cocktails. I almost convinced myself that I'd imagined the conversation I'd overheard days earlier. Maybe I was overthinking things. Maybe Victoria wasn't plotting anything. Maybe tonight would actually be a celebration. Then I noticed Madison, Ethan's sister. She kept checking her phone. Over and over. Every few minutes. Like she was waiting for something. Or someone. When our eyes met, she immediately looked away. Big yikes. Rachel noticed too. "Girl, what's her deal?" she whispered. No clue. But I had a feeling. And that feeling wasn't good. Around 9 o'clock, the staff rolled out Victoria's birthday cake. Everyone gathered around. The rooftop filled with applause. Victoria made her wish. The crowd cheered. Then Ethan stood up. My heart started racing. This was it. He tapped his champagne glass. Can I have everyone's attention? The rooftop quieted. Every face turned toward us. Ethan smiled. The same smile that made me fall in love with him. We've got some exciting news. I squeezed his hand. And then he said the words we'd been waiting weeks to share. Claire and I are having a baby. For one glorious second, the entire world stopped. Then I heard a glass hit the table. Hard. Click. The sound echoed across the rooftop. Everyone turned. Victoria was standing, and the look on her face made my blood run cold. Because she didn't look surprised. She looked ready, like she'd been waiting all night for this exact moment. And when she opened her mouth, everything changed. I expected congratulations, maybe even tears. What I didn't expect was Victoria staring directly at me in front of 30 people and saying 5 words that would blow up the entire party. 5 words that would eventually land me in a hospital. 5 words I'll never forget. I don't believe you. I don't believe you. The words hit the rooftop like a record scratch. For a second, nobody moved. Nobody even breathed. I honestly thought I'd heard her wrong. What? I asked. Victoria folded her arms. I said, I don't believe you're pregnant. A few nervous laughs came from the crowd. People thought she was joking. I knew better. Victoria wasn't smiling. Not even a little. Ethan looked stunned. Mom, what are you doing? I'm asking a reasonable question. No, you're not. The tension in the air was getting real awkward. The kind of awkward where people suddenly become very interested in their drinks. Victoria turned toward the guests. You all know my family has assets. You know Ethan has access to a trust. I felt my stomach drop. Oh no, she wasn't actually going there. Except she was. Women have lied about pregnancies for money before. The crowd went dead silent. Rachel whispered, oh hell no. I couldn't believe this was happening. Not at a family celebration. Not in front of 30 people. And definitely not over a baby she'd never even bothered to ask about. I took a slow breath. Victoria, I have ultrasound photos. Then show them. The way she said it made my skin crawl. Like she wasn't asking. She was challenging me. Excuse me? You heard me. She stepped closer. If you're telling the truth, prove it. Every head on that rooftop turned toward me. I felt like I was standing under a spotlight. 30 sets of eyes. Waiting. Judging. Watching. And suddenly I understood. This wasn't about a pregnancy. This wasn't about concern. This was about power. Victoria wanted to embarrass me. She wanted me scrambling for evidence while everyone watched. She wanted control. And she expected me to hand it to her. Not happening. I looked her straight in the eye. No. The entire rooftop froze. Victoria blinked. Like she'd never heard that word before. No, she repeated. No. I kept my voice calm. Steady. The same voice I used at work during emergencies. I'm not proving my pregnancy to a crowd. A murmur spread through the guests. Victoria's face hardened. You refuse because you can't. That's not why. Then why? Because it's none of your business. Big mistake. The second those words left my mouth, something changed in her expression. It wasn't anger. It was rage. Pure rage. Like, I'd challenge her authority in front of an audience. And Victoria Langley hated being challenged. The crowd could feel it too. Rachel moved closer beside me. Ethan looked trapped between us. His mother on one side, his wife on the other. And instead of standing up for me, he hesitated. That hesitation hurt more than I expected. Because in that moment I needed my husband. And he was just standing there. Frozen. Watching. Victoria took another step forward. Then another. You think you're smart, she said quietly. You think you've got everyone fooled. I shook my head. Victoria, stop. But she wasn't listening anymore. The woman wasn't having a conversation. She was building momentum. And once Victoria got going, good luck stopping her. I glanced around the rooftop. People looked uncomfortable. Some looked embarrassed. A few looked scared. But nobody stepped in. Nobody wanted to challenge the queen of the family. And that's when I realized something terrifying. Victoria truly believed her own story. She genuinely thought I was some gold digger trying to trap her son. Nothing I said was going to change her mind. Nothing. Because people don't listen when they're looking for confirmation. They only listen when they're looking for truth. And Victoria had already made her choice. What happened next took less than a minute, but it changed my life forever. As Victoria moved closer, I instinctively took a step backward. Then another. I didn't realize I was getting closer to the edge of the rooftop. I didn't realize Ethan had stopped moving. And I definitely didn't realize that within the next 60 seconds, I'd be fighting for my baby from a hospital bed. Because the argument was over. And something much worse was about to begin. Everything after that happened crazy fast. 1 second I was standing there trying to keep my cool. The next, the entire night went off the rails. Victoria kept moving toward me.
Step, step, step.
Her face was red. Her breathing was heavy. And the more she talked, the louder she got. You think you can fool this family? Victoria, stop. You think we're stupid? Enough. Even guests were starting to look uncomfortable. A few people tried changing the subject. Others pretended to check their phones. Nobody wanted to get involved. Classic rich family behavior. Ignore the problem and hope it disappears. Unfortunately for them, this problem wasn't going anywhere. I took another step backward. Then another. I wasn't paying attention to where I was standing. I was focused on Victoria. Big mistake. Because behind me sat a decorative stone planter that separated the rooftop from a lower terrace, about 10 feet down. I remembered noticing it earlier. Now I was standing way too close to it. Rachel saw it first. Claire, watch out. I glanced back, just for a second, and that's when Victoria lunged forward. To this day, I still remember the look on her face. Not panic, not fear, determination. Like she'd already convinced herself she was right. Her hands came up.
Fast.
Both palms hit my shoulders.
Hard.
The force caught me completely off guard. My heels slipped. The world tilted. And suddenly there was nothing underneath me. No floor. No balance. Nothing. People screamed. Someone yelled my name. The lights above me spun in circles. Then,
crash.
Pain exploded through my body. The impact knocked every bit of air out of my lungs. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't move.
Couldn't think.
The only thing running through my head was one terrifying thought. The baby. Oh God. The baby. I tried sitting up. Instant regret. Pain shot through my wrist. Something was definitely broken. Around me, chaos erupted. Guests crowded the edge of the rooftop. Someone called 911. Rachel came running down a nearby staircase. Tears streamed down her face. Claire, stay still. Meanwhile, Ethan finally appeared. And I'll never forget what happened next.
He looked at me.
Then he looked up at his mother. Then back at me. Like he couldn't decide who needed him more. That hurt worse than the broken wrist. Because in that moment, I wasn't just his wife. I was carrying his child. And he still hesitated. Paramedics arrived within minutes. The ride to the hospital felt like a blur of flashing lights and pain. I remember holding my stomach the entire way.
Praying.
Begging. Promising I'd never complain about morning sickness again if my baby was okay. The emergency room staff rushed me straight into evaluation. Doctors moved quickly. Nurses hooked up monitors. Nobody would tell me anything. Every second felt like an hour. Finally, a doctor entered the room. And from the look on his face, I thought he was about to give me the worst news of my life. But the real nightmare wasn't the fall. It wasn't the broken wrist. And it wasn't the hours I spent terrified for my baby. The real nightmare started the next morning. Because while I was lying in a hospital bed trying to heal, someone was already rewriting the story. And the first person to betray me wasn't Victoria. It was Ethan. The doctor stepped into the room. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I was bracing myself for the worst. Then he smiled. The baby is okay. I immediately burst into tears. Not cute movie tears. Full-on ugly crying. The kind where you're too relieved to care how ridiculous you look. The heartbeat was strong. The baby was still hanging on. I thanked every higher power I could think of. For the first time since the fall, I felt a tiny bit of peace. Unfortunately, that peace didn't last very long. My wrist was fractured. My ribs were badly bruised. And, because of the trauma from the fall, doctors wanted to monitor the pregnancy closely for the next several weeks. But physically, I was going to recover. Emotionally, that was a different story. Ethan stayed at the hospital that first night. At least physically. Mentally, he seemed a million miles away. He barely talked, barely looked at me. Mostly he sat in a chair staring at the floor, like he was trying to convince himself none of this was real. Around midnight, I woke up thirsty. The room was dark. Ethan wasn't there. I figured he had gone for coffee. Then I heard his voice in the hallway. Quiet, nervous, talking on the phone. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the hallway was practically silent. Every word carried. I know.
Pause.
I understand. Another pause. Then came the sentence that changed everything. Maybe she lost her balance. I froze. My heart actually stopped for a second. Lost her balance? Seriously? I had just been shoved off a rooftop. 30 people saw it. And already he was helping rewrite the story. I listened as his mother's voice crackled through the phone. I couldn't hear every word, but I heard enough. Enough to understand what was happening. Victoria wasn't worried about me. She wasn't worried about the baby. She was worried about liability, about witnesses, about lawsuits, about her reputation.
And Ethan?
Instead of defending his wife, he was listening. The call ended. A few moments later he walked back into the room, acting normal, like nothing happened, like I hadn't heard every word. I looked at him differently after that. Not with anger. Not yet. Something colder. Disappointment. Because deep down I realized something I never wanted to admit. When forced to choose between me and his family, Ethan wasn't choosing me. The next morning Rachel showed up carrying coffee and enough energy to power a small city. One look at my face, and she knew something was wrong. What happened? So I told her. Everything. The phone call. The excuses.
The lies.
The cover-up already starting. Rachel sat quietly. Then she said 5 words that changed the entire direction of the story. Do they have cameras? I blinked.
What?
The hotel. I stared at her. Then my eyes widened. Of course. It was a luxury hotel. There had to be security cameras. Rachel leaned forward. Girl, if there's footage, this whole thing is game over. For the first time since the fall, I felt something I hadn't felt in days.
Hope.
Because people can lie. Memories can change. Stories can get twisted. But cameras? Cameras don't care who your family is. They just record the truth. And the truth was exactly what Victoria was afraid of. 3 days later, I got a message from someone I never expected. One of the guests from the party. At first, it looked harmless. Then I opened the screenshot attached to it. And my entire world stopped. Because sitting there on my screen was proof that this confrontation hadn't happened by accident. Someone had been planning it for days. And the messages were about to expose all of them. 3 days after I got home from the hospital, my phone buzzed. At first, I almost ignored it. I was exhausted. Between doctor's appointments, pregnancy monitoring, and trying not to lose my mind, I wasn't exactly in the mood for random messages. Then I saw the sender.
Ashley.
One of the guests from Victoria's birthday party. We weren't close. Honestly, we'd barely spoken before that night, which made her message even stranger. Hey Claire, I think you need to see this. Attached was a screenshot. Just one. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious. At least not at first glance. I opened it, and my stomach dropped. It was from a family group chat. A group chat I wasn't part of. The screenshot showed messages sent 2 days before the party. Madison. What if she announces it there? Victoria. Then we'll handle it there. Madison. In front of everyone? Victoria. Exactly. If she's lying, she'll crack under pressure. I stared at the screen. Over. And over. And over again. My hands started shaking. Because suddenly everything made sense. The weird looks. The secret conversations. The tension. The questions. The confrontation. None of it was spontaneous. None of it. Victoria hadn't lost control that night. She'd planned the confrontation before I ever stepped onto that rooftop. Ashley called a few minutes later. "I thought you should know." "How did you get this?" There was a long pause. "Someone accidentally sent it to the wrong person."
Well,
That was awkward.
for them.
Amazing for me. Ashley lowered her voice. "Claire, people are talking." My stomach tightened. What kind of talking? The kind where Victoria is trying really hard to control the narrative. I wasn't surprised. Not even a little. Victoria had spent her entire life controlling stories,
Controlling people.
controlling outcomes. This was just another problem she thought she could manage. The difference? This time there was evidence. Actual receipts. And receipts don't lie. After we hung up, I forwarded the screenshot to Rachel. Her response came back immediately.
Oh,
"She's cooked." For the first time in days, I laughed. A real laugh. Because Rachel wasn't wrong. This wasn't proof of the shove. Not yet. But it proved intent. It proved planning. It proved the confrontation wasn't some emotional outburst. It was a setup. And if Victoria had planned one part of the night, what else had she planned? That question kept bouncing around my head. Until later that evening. That's when another message arrived. This one from a number I didn't recognize. No introduction. No explanation. Just a single sentence. "The hotel cameras caught everything." I stared at the screen, heart pounding. Then a second message appeared. "But someone is trying to make the footage disappear." Suddenly, the room felt a whole lot colder. Because covering up a confrontation was one thing. Trying to erase evidence? That was a completely different game. And if someone was desperate enough to hide the footage, then whatever was on those cameras had to be devastating. The next morning, I contacted the hotel. What I learned during that phone call changed everything. Because the footage still existed.
for now.
But according to the manager, someone from Ethan's family had already called multiple times asking about it. And once I heard the name of the person making those calls, I realized the cover-up went much deeper than I thought. Much deeper. The next morning, I called the hotel. I expected a quick conversation. Maybe a simple yes or no answer about the security cameras. Instead, the manager sounded nervous from the second he picked up. After explaining who I was, I asked the question that had been keeping me awake all night. "Do you still have the rooftop footage from Victoria Langley's party?" There was a pause. A long one. Then he said something that made my heart race. "Yes." I nearly dropped the phone. The footage existed. Thank God. But before I could celebrate, he added something else. "Ms. Bennett, you're actually the third person who's called about it." The third? I sat up straighter. Who else called? Another pause. I probably shouldn't say. "Please." The manager sighed. One of them was Victoria Langley. I wasn't surprised. Not even a little. What did she want? She was asking about our retention policy. My stomach twisted. Retention policy. That's corporate language for how long before the footage gets deleted. Rachel, who was sitting beside me, immediately muttered, "Oh, she's panicking." The manager continued. She also asked if guests could request footage removal. There it was. The smoking gun. Victoria wasn't trying to find evidence. She was trying to find out how to get rid of it. I thanked him and hung up. Then I called a lawyer. Not because I wanted revenge. Not because I wanted money. Because I was pregnant. And somebody had shoved me off a rooftop. Big difference. The lawyer listened carefully. Then asked a question I hadn't even considered. Were there visible injuries? Both shoulders. Interesting. Why? Because shoulder bruising often helps establish direction of force. I blinked. The bruises. The same bruises I'd photographed the day I got home. The same photos I almost didn't take. Suddenly, those pictures mattered. A lot. Over the next few days, I sent everything to my attorney. Medical reports. Photos. Witness names. The screenshot from the family group chat. Everything. Meanwhile, Victoria's family went suspiciously quiet.
Too quiet.
Nobody called. Nobody texted. Nobody checked on the baby. Nothing. And honestly, that silence scared me more than the yelling. Because powerful people don't usually stay quiet unless they're planning something. Then Friday afternoon happened, and all hell broke loose. A witness finally came forward. Not just any witness. The witness. The one person standing closest to Victoria when everything happened. And, according to her, the story everyone had been hearing was a complete lie. That night, my lawyer called. His voice sounded different. Excited. Focused. Almost shocked. Then he said 7 words that changed everything. We've seen the security footage. And what it showed was even worse than I remembered. I barely slept that night. The second my lawyer mentioned the footage, my brain started racing. Every possible scenario ran through my head. Maybe it was blurry. Maybe it missed the actual shove. Maybe Victoria would somehow explain it away. By morning, I was a nervous wreck. Then my lawyer called again. And within 30 seconds, every doubt disappeared.
Claire, he said.
The footage is clear. Very clear. I gripped the phone tighter. How clear? The pause felt endless. Then he answered. Clear enough that nobody can honestly claim you fell by yourself. I closed my eyes. For the first time since the rooftop, I felt vindicated. The cameras had captured everything. Victoria moving toward me. The confrontation. The physical contact. My fall. Everything. No missing angles. No confusion. No mystery. Just facts. Cold, undeniable facts. And facts are dangerous when you're a liar. The witness statement made things even worse for Victoria. According to the witness, several guests had immediately described the incident as a shove. Not an accident. Not a misunderstanding. A shove. But somehow, within 24 hours, the story started changing. Funny how that works. Almost like somebody was making phone calls. Almost like somebody was applying pressure. Almost like somebody had a reputation to protect. My lawyer wasted no time. He immediately sent legal notices demanding preservation of all footage, emails, internal reports, and witness records. Translation? Nobody was deleting anything now. Nobody. A few hours later, my phone lit up. Victoria. Calling. For the first time since the fall. I stared at the screen, then answered. Hello. Silence. A long silence. Then finally, I think things have gotten out of hand. I almost laughed. Out of hand? Lady, you shoved a pregnant woman off a rooftop. We're way past out of hand. Victoria continued. We can resolve this privately. There it was. The real reason she called. Not concern. Not guilt. Damage control. I told her I'd speak through my attorney. Then I hung up. Best decision of my life. Because less than an hour later, another call came in. This time from Ethan. And judging by the sound of his voice, his family was officially in panic mode. The empire Victoria spent decades controlling was starting to crack.
And she knew it.
When Ethan finally spoke, he didn't apologize. He didn't ask about the baby. And he definitely didn't ask how I was feeling. Instead, he asked one question. A question so shocking it told me exactly whose side he was on. Are you really going through with this? And that's when I realized my marriage might already be over. The moment Ethan asked, Are you really going through with this? I knew exactly where his loyalty was. And it wasn't with me. I sat there in silence for a few seconds. Not because I didn't know what to say. Because I couldn't believe he actually said it. Going through with what? I finally asked. He sighed heavily. The lawyers. The investigation. All of it. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was ridiculous. Your mother shoved me off a rooftop. Claire.
No.
I cut him off. For weeks I'd been listening. Explaining. Being patient. I was done. I ended up in the hospital, Ethan. Silence. The baby could have died. More silence. Then came the sentence that shattered whatever hope I still had. My mom didn't mean for any of that to happen. There it was. The excuse. The justification. The loophole. The thing everyone in that family always used when Victoria crossed a line. She didn't mean it. She didn't mean to humiliate people. She didn't mean to control people. She didn't mean to hurt people. Funny how the damage always happened anyway. I ended the call shortly after that. There was nothing left to discuss. The next week moved fast. Really fast. Witnesses began talking. More people came forward. And the stories all sounded remarkably similar. Several guests admitted they'd received calls from Victoria. Others said Madison had reached out. A few even admitted they'd been encouraged to avoid making assumptions about what happened. Translation?
Keep your mouth shut.
But once people realized security footage existed, everything changed. Suddenly nobody wanted to be caught lying. Especially not for Victoria. Then came the biggest blow yet. The police officially opened an investigation. That announcement hit the family like a freight train. For the first time, this wasn't just family drama. This wasn't gossip. This wasn't damage control. This was serious. And panic started spreading.
Fast.
Because wealthy people can influence opinions. They can influence conversations. Sometimes they can even influence outcomes. But security footage? That's a different beast. And everyone knew it, including Victoria. 3 days later, detectives interviewed the guests. One witness gave a statement so damaging that my attorney immediately called me afterward. His exact words were, "You're not going to believe what she admitted." And what that witness revealed would completely change the investigation. By the time detectives started conducting formal interviews, Victoria's carefully built image was starting to crumble. For years, she'd been the untouchable matriarch. The woman everyone listened to. The woman nobody questioned. Now, people were talking. And once people start talking, secrets don't stay buried for long. The witness my attorney mentioned was a woman named Linda. She'd been standing only a few feet away during the confrontation, closer than almost anyone else. According to Linda, Victoria had said something shortly before Ethan announced the pregnancy. Something nobody had thought much about at the time.
But now?
It sounded very different. Victoria allegedly told Madison, "If she tries it tonight, I'll handle it myself." That statement hit investigators hard, because it suggested intent, planning, preparation, exactly what the family group chat screenshot hinted at. And Linda wasn't the only problem for Victoria. Another guest confirmed seeing Victoria aggressively move toward me before the fall. Then another witness backed up that account. Then another. Suddenly the story wasn't one woman versus an influential family. It was multiple independent witnesses telling essentially the same story. And that's when the cracks started appearing inside the family itself. Madison stopped defending her mother publicly. Victoria's husband disappeared from family events. Several relatives quietly distanced themselves. Nobody wanted to be the last person standing when everything collapsed. Meanwhile, Ethan was spiraling. The pressure was getting to him. Every new witness statement pushed him further into a corner. Because sooner or later, he was going to have to answer one question. Why did he keep defending a story that wasn't true? My lawyer thought the answer was simple.
Fear.
Fear of losing his family. Fear of losing money. Fear of choosing sides. Maybe he was right. But from where I was sitting, none of that mattered anymore. Because every day made one thing clearer. My marriage wasn't surviving this. Not a chance. Then came the call nobody in the Langley family wanted. The district attorney's office requested all evidence. Every witness statement. Every medical record. Every video file. Everything. And when that happened, the mood shifted instantly. This wasn't a scandal anymore. It was becoming a legal case. And Victoria finally realized something terrifying. For the first time in her life, money might not be enough. That evening, a new piece of evidence surfaced. Not from a witness. Not from the hotel. Not from the police. From Ethan himself. A document he signed just days after the incident. A document he thought nobody would ever see. And when my lawyer placed it on the table, even he looked shocked. Because Ethan hadn't just offended his mother. He may have lied for her. The district attorney's office wasn't the only one reviewing evidence. My lawyer had been digging too. And a week after the investigation officially began, he called me into his office. The second I walked in, I knew something was different. There was a thick folder sitting on his desk. And he looked angry. Not frustrated. Angry. "What's wrong?" I asked. Without saying a word, he slid a document across the table. "Read this." I looked down. At first, it seemed harmless. Just a written statement. Then I saw the signature at the bottom.
Ethan.
My stomach dropped. The statement had been submitted only 2 days after the rooftop incident. According to the document, Victoria never shoved me. Instead, it claimed I had become emotional, stepped backward on my own, and accidentally lost my balance. I read the paragraph twice, then a third time. I couldn't believe it. It wasn't just misleading. It was completely false. The security footage already proved otherwise. Multiple witnesses proved otherwise. Even the physical injuries proved otherwise. Yet there it was, in black and white. My husband had signed it. My attorney leaned back in his chair. This could become a serious problem for him. I looked up. What do you mean? If investigators determine he knowingly provided false information, that's not something they take lightly. For a moment, I felt nothing. No anger. No sadness. Just emptiness. Because deep down, I'd already lost my husband the night he stood frozen on that rooftop. This document simply confirmed it. The Ethan I married would have protected me. The Ethan sitting in that statement was protecting his mother. And those were two completely different people. Over the next several days, pressure inside the Langley family exploded. Relatives started arguing. Friends stopped returning calls. Business partners quietly distanced themselves. The family that once looked untouchable was falling apart from the inside. And the worst part? The investigation was only getting started. Then investigators uncovered something nobody expected. Something that had absolutely nothing to do with me. A secret from Victoria's past. A secret she'd spent years keeping buried. And once it surfaced, everything changed. Victoria always acted like she was the smartest person in every room, the most prepared, the most powerful, the one holding all the cards. But here's the thing about secrets. They don't stay buried forever, especially when investigators start digging. A few weeks into the case, rumors started circulating. At first, nobody knew if they were true. Then pieces of information started lining up. Old court records, previous complaints, witness statements, former employees. Suddenly a pattern emerged. And it wasn't pretty. For years, people had quietly accused Victoria of intimidation, threats, manipulation, using money and influence to pressure people. Most of those accusations never went anywhere. Not because they weren't true, because nobody wanted to fight someone with her resources.
But now?
The spotlight was on her. And people who had stayed silent for years suddenly felt a lot more comfortable speaking up. One former employee described Victoria as someone who believed rules only applied to other people. Another said she treated disagreement like betrayal. A third claimed she'd spent decades controlling every aspect of family life. None of it directly proved anything about my case, but it painted a picture. A very familiar picture, because it sounded exactly like the woman I'd seen on that rooftop. Meanwhile, Madison was starting to crack. Friends told me she was distancing herself from her mother, not because she suddenly developed a conscience, because she was scared. Scared of being dragged down with her. And honestly, I couldn't blame her. The evidence kept getting worse. The witness statements kept piling up. The footage wasn't going away. And the district attorney wasn't backing down. Then came the biggest surprise of all. Victoria requested a meeting. Not with the police. Not with prosecutors. With me. After everything that happened, she wanted to sit down and talk. Rachel nearly spit out her coffee when she heard. Girl, absolutely not. I laughed. For the first time in months, Rachel and I actually agreed on something immediately. Because whatever Victoria wanted, it wasn't an apology. People like Victoria don't suddenly wake up humble. They negotiate. They maneuver. They calculate. And I had a feeling this meeting was no different. The question was, what was she so desperate to say? 2 days later, Victoria walked into a conference room carrying a single folder. She looked older, tired, almost nervous. Then she opened the folder and made an offer so shocking that even my attorney went silent. And that's when I realized just how scared she really was. 2 days later, I walked into a downtown conference room with my attorney. Victoria was already there. And honestly, she looked rough. Not physically. Mentally. The woman who used to command every room she entered suddenly looked like someone carrying 1,000 pounds on her shoulders. For a second, I almost didn't recognize her. Almost. Then she looked up. And there it was. That same calculating look. The same one she'd worn on the rooftop. She wasn't here to apologize. She was here to negotiate. A leather folder sat on the table in front of her. The second everyone sat down, she opened it. My attorney prepared a proposal. There it was. Business mode. No apology. No concern for the baby. No acknowledgement of what happened. Just paperwork. My lawyer took the folder, flipped through a few pages, then suddenly stopped. His eyebrows shot up. What? I asked. He slowly turned the folder toward me. The number printed on the page made my jaw drop. It was more money than most people make in several years. Victoria was offering a massive settlement in exchange for one thing: silence. No interviews. No public statements. No further legal action beyond the existing process. Basically, she wanted the entire nightmare buried.
Fast.
For the first time since entering the room, Victoria finally spoke directly to me. Let's end this. I almost laughed. End this? Like it was some misunderstanding? Like she hadn't accused me of lying. Like she hadn't shoved a pregnant woman. Like her family hadn't spent months trying to destroy my credibility. My attorney didn't even let me answer. We're not interested. Victoria's face tightened.
For the first time, I saw panic.
Real panic. Because she was used to solving problems with money. And suddenly money wasn't working. Then she made a mistake. A huge mistake. She looked directly at me and said, "You have no idea what's at stake." I stared back.
No.
You don't. The room went silent. Because for the first time in her life, Victoria wasn't controlling the conversation. And she knew it. When the meeting ended, she looked smaller somehow. Less powerful. Less certain. Like she finally understood what was coming. And, trust me, what was coming was way worse than a rejected settlement. The very next week, prosecutors made a decision. A decision nobody in the Langley family expected. And when the news broke, the entire family went into full-blown crisis mode. Because Victoria's problems had just become criminal. The call came early on a Tuesday morning. I was halfway through breakfast when my attorney's name flashed across my screen. The second I answered, I knew something big had happened.
Claire, he said.
They filed. My heart started pounding. What filed? Charges. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Everything suddenly felt very quiet. Months of evidence. Months of interviews. Months of lies. And now it was finally happening. Victoria was officially facing criminal charges. The news spread fast. Really fast. Within hours, everyone seemed to know. Family members.
Friends.
Business associates. Former employees. Everyone. And the reactions were exactly what you'd expect. Some people were shocked. Others weren't shocked at all. A few even admitted they'd been waiting for this moment for years. Meanwhile, the Langley family completely unraveled. Madison stopped defending her mother. Several relatives publicly distanced themselves. Business partners began backing away. Even longtime family friends suddenly disappeared. Funny how that works. People love standing next to power. Until power becomes a liability. Then they're gone. Ethan took it the hardest. Not because of the charges. Because reality finally caught up to him. The footage existed. The witnesses existed. The signed statement existed. There was nowhere left to hide. One afternoon, he showed up at my house. Unexpected. Uninvited. And for the first time in months, he looked broken. Not angry. Not defensive. Broken. I messed up, he said quietly. I believed him. The problem was, some mistakes can't be undone. A shattered glass can be glued back together.
Trust doesn't work that way.
Especially after everything that happened. Especially after he chose his mother's version of events over the truth. The conversation lasted less than 15 minutes. When he left, I knew something with absolute certainty. My marriage was over. Completely. And honestly, I felt relieved. Because I wasn't fighting for my marriage anymore. I was fighting for my future, for my baby, for the life waiting on the other side of all this chaos. And for the first time, that future actually looked bright. But before any of that could happen, there was still one final chapter left. One final hearing, one final decision, and one final consequence that nobody saw coming. A few months later, 6 months pregnant and carrying a folder full of evidence, I walked into a conference room for what would become the last major battle of this entire nightmare. By the time I walked out, my future would be secured. Victoria's empire would be finished. And the people who betrayed me would finally face the consequences of their choices. 6 months pregnant, carrying a folder thick enough to stop a bullet, I walked into the final hearing. And honestly, I wasn't nervous. A few months earlier, I would have been terrified. Back then, I was fighting for answers. Fighting to be believed. Fighting to protect my child. Now, the facts were doing all the fighting for me. The evidence spoke for itself. The security footage, the witness statements, the medical reports, the screenshots, the false statement Ethan signed. Everything pointed in one direction. The truth. Victoria sat across the room. And for the first time since I'd met her, she looked small. Not physically. Emotionally. The woman who once controlled everyone around her now had no control over what was coming next. The hearing lasted several hours. Lawyers talked. Documents were reviewed. Witnesses were referenced. By the end of the day, the outcome felt almost inevitable. The legal consequences would continue moving forward. The custody arrangements were established. And most importantly, my unborn daughter would remain protected. When the hearing ended, I gathered my things and stood up. Victoria looked at me, like she wanted to say something. Maybe an apology. Maybe an excuse. Maybe one final attempt to shift the blame. I don't know, because I never gave her the chance. I simply walked away. And that was the last time I ever saw her. A few weeks later, my divorce became official. No dramatic courtroom speech. No emotional reunion. Just signatures. Paperwork. The end. As for Ethan, he reached out a few times afterward. Text messages. Emails. Letters. Mostly apologies. Mostly regret. But some bridges burned too completely to rebuild. And ours was one of them. Then March arrived. And with it came the moment that changed everything. After months of stress, fear, court hearings, and uncertainty, my daughter was born. 7 pounds. Healthy.
Loud. Perfect.
The second I held her in my arms, every sleepless night suddenly felt worth it. Every tear, every lawyer meeting, every doctor's appointment, every battle. Worth it. I named her Ava. And as I looked down at her tiny face, I made a promise. No matter what happened in the future, no matter how messy the past had been, she would grow up surrounded by honesty, by stability, by people who chose her. Every single day. Meanwhile, the Langley family continued falling apart. Business relationships disappeared. Family members stopped speaking to each other. The trust changed hands. People who once followed Victoria's lead quietly moved on. The empire she'd spent years controlling never fully recovered. Funny how life works sometimes. The thing Victoria feared most wasn't losing money. It wasn't losing influence. It wasn't even losing her reputation. It was losing control.
And in the end,
that's exactly what happened. As for me, I got something better.
peace.
Real peace. The kind that comes from knowing you survived something that was supposed to break you. Sometimes people ask if I regret fighting back. If I regret refusing the settlement. If I regret taking on a powerful family. Not for a second. Because this story was never about revenge. It was about truth. And the truth has a funny way of showing up eventually. Even when people spend a fortune trying to bury it. Today, Ava is thriving. Our home is filled with laughter instead of tension. And every now and then, when I hear her running through the house, I think back to that rooftop. To the fear. To the betrayal. To the chaos. And I'm reminded of something important. The worst day of my life didn't become the end of my story. It became the beginning of a better one. So, if you've ever had someone try to rewrite your story, If you've ever been told to stay quiet, if you've ever felt outnumbered by people with more power, more money, or more influence, remember this. The truth doesn't need an army.
It just needs time.
And sooner or later, the truth always shows up.